First question to the author. You've unleashed the Vajra in Delhi. Take it to Beijing. Response patterns, pros and cons. Three questions to the panelists, very short. India and China were separated through millennia till they occupied Tibet. Nepal and China same. It just took 70 years, a millennium strong relationship sundered in 70 years by China. India and Tibet, India and almost Nepal, up to a point, in the perception of many Tibetans, in Dharamsala and India, in other areas, Nepal has held its own, but in the question of Tibetans, Nepal is like a vassal state, I'm using strong words, as far as Beijing is concerned.
Thank you.
And continue to that, what is the opinion of the, I'm not talking of Buddhism, Nepalese visa Dalai Lama, who even Xi Jinping says is a thorn in his flesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And more questions, we'll take a few. General Mehta, you wanted, then back, there's a lady there in the back, on the right to your...
Thank you very much. Catherine Ryan from British High Commission. I've got two questions, if I may, but I'll keep them short. 2015 seems to be a real seminal moment in India, Nepal and China relations. So my first question would be, Sujeev, you mentioned that before 2015, China had very little interest in Nepal. Why was that? And how much of the interest from 2015 onwards has been about China-Nepal relations versus India-China relations? And second question, Akanshi, you mentioned about increased project delivery and how that had improved, but it still seems sometimes with conversations that the memories of 2015 are so raw. What needs to change to improve India-Nepal relations? Is it just about project delivery, or is there more that needs to happen? Thank you.
In the front, we have General Mehta.
Thank you. The book is about Nepal, India, and the Himalayan connectivity challenge. And this is a historical question in the triangular relationship between India, China, and Nepal. And Prithvinarayan Shah reminded us in 1746 how Nepal should go about it. And I think Nepal has not deviated from what the Shah king, the founder of the Shah dynasty, wrote. But in your, I haven't read the book, but I read your piece in the HT, where you have said categorically that Nepal has moved beyond India. Now that's an extremely questionable statement. From the panel, discussion of the panel and the way the Chinese have gone about it, the Chinese have a CPEC through Pakistan, and nobody quibbles about the strategic motive behind that. I've just come back from Burma, and we have this MEC done, but there is no strategic madness to what is being portrayed as the BRI through Nepal. And the BRI through Nepal has to take India into, after all, what is the end purpose of the BRI, the connectivity program through Nepal? Coming to Kathmandu, are they going to bring tourists? Are they going to bring goodies? So that's one. And the second point is this societal change in Nepal. I think this is profound. I'm somebody who has seen Nepal in 1959, and I see it twice a year now. And this is the most profound change that has taken place in Nepal. One aspect that you have not covered is the military-to-military relations. I think we must not just the fact that they recruit in the army, but the relationship between ex-servicemen, which used to be suspect, say, a decade ago, is now a very strong binding factor. It's a political constituency for India. But overall, I think your book makes a good case. But India will not participate in the balancing. India will deal with Nepal bilaterally. It will not deal trilaterally. Something that Nepal wants.
Well, if I may just come in, a bit of the archival work I've done. Yes, so I think that you're absolutely right on the bilateral side. Let me just come in. But I like to remind people of one particular project in 1956-57 in Nepal. It was a joint American-Indian road building project in Nepal. Yes. So even I came into this and saying, oh, the US is showing up for the first time, the Japanese are showing up for the first time. There's a history of other actors who have been involved, and then things went south on sort of that particular road building project. But Sujeev, I think the question on the military-military relations is also interesting, or any one of you would like to take it, because we've had also the first combined military exercise between the PLA and the Nepali army, right? So there's a new actor also on the military front showing in town and slowly building coordination and which military relationship which is also going beyond India in that sense.
The statement that Nepal has moved beyond India.
It is moving, I would say, and
that is what I am questioning.
The fact that you have first time the army in Nepal having an exercise with China, it's 70 years also, or 60 years of diplomatic relations, I think it's telling that it is moving in some directions. But Sujeev, my question to you now beyond it is also, what are the political implications of hanging out with the PRC? You speak in your book about the soft diplomacy of China. You laud the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu because you speak Nepali. They treat everyone very nicely. We had the Chinese ambassador dancing Nepali songs and music, and it's a great charm offensive. I mean, Chinese are masters at it, right? But we also had the first sort of Xi Jinping political workshop for the Communist Party of Nepal to have between both parties a discussion on governance models. And I'm sure we're not hearing a lot about private citizens' rights in those workshops, or about a free rule of law in terms of judicial system. Okay, we'll continue. Sorry, I couldn't resist on those two things. But we had someone there in the back, some student, and sir.
Should I speak now?
There's after.
Hello, this is Bipin. I'm a PhD student here in South Asian University. I could see Professor Hersey here. I think he's gone now. In this moment, I'd like to take opportunity to ask a question with Professor Ampilama. As recently Constantino talked about how the American and the Indian used to do a project together in the Nepal. Yes, it is the reality fact in 1950s. And in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, during the time of Cold War, most of the regional and the physical connectivity project in Nepal has been associated and then understood as a competition between the two Cold War blocs, or the competition between the major rivals like India and China. At the moment in 2017, Nepal became a part of BRI, while India is not accepting it based on its other grounds. Do you think, in this context, Nepal accession to BRI would change Nepal's foreign policy orientation towards China or India? And do you think it obscures India's position in Nepal?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, here in the front, please. First row.
My name is K.S. Subramanian. I was formerly in the Union Home Ministry and the Intelligence Bureau. I was recently in Nepal and looking at the impact of Xi Jinping's visit to China, or visit to Nepal. By the way, I would like to tell the General here that Nepal has certainly moved beyond India in one respect. That is, it has the first communist government in the South Asian region. It's very, very important. I went to look at the impact of Xi Jinping's visit to Nepal, and I could do a lot of work, but I have not yet written anything. But during my stay in Nepal, I was able to meet a general of the army. I don't know, Vivek Kumar Shah. I don't know if you've seen. And the general has a book, for the first ever book by a Army General Nepal on Nepalese politics. It's an extremely important book, and I'm reading it, and I want to review it. But about Xi Jinping's visit to China, I found that Xi Jinping himself has written a very big article on China.
That's right.
On Nepal. It's a fantastic book, extremely interesting. It's not a book, it's a paper. It's a very interesting paper in which he emphasizes the role of Buddhism in China and also his own interest in Buddhism. Some people say that he and Xi Jinping and his wife are privately Buddhists. I don't know whether it's true or not. But the question I have for General Lama, Mr. Lama here, is that whether the emergence of communism in China, in Nepal, would have any far-reaching impact in the region, because I feel that in India we have had communist governments in West Bengal and Kerala, but the Kerala government was dismissed in a very undemocratic manner. In West Bengal also the communists have not performed very well. But the Nepalese communists are extremely interesting. I spent a lot of time talking to many people, and I do propose to write something, but I would like to have your views on how you view the communist movement in
So
Nepal.
I'll take a few more with the promise of everyone to keep it very short. Okay, please keep it short. One question, so we can take 3 more for perspective. I think it's interesting to get different views, please. And then we'll close with the panel with everyone to sort of.
Thank you. My name is John Sinclair. I'm a Canadian who actually used to work on Nepal from Canadian cedar back in the 30 or 40 years ago. And this issue of how do you build up capacity was a very hot topic, and Canada devoted $1 million, which was a lot of money for Canada in those days, to build up a technical capacity inside the Nepalese government to handle its noisy neighbor to the south or its aggressive neighbor to the south, depending on who they were talking to. And I'm curious because this issue still seems to be there. How do you build up in Nepal, in a country which is on the move, I hear what you're saying, very, very important, the capacity to deal with its noisy neighbors? One of which is a major power called China, and the other one is this very docile country called India, which seems to be sitting passively, as I hear you speaking, watching what's going on.
Nihar? Here on the third row, please. Third here.
Yeah, I am Nihar Naik, researcher with IDSA. Congratulations, Sujeev ji, for your book. My specific questions to you. As you know, the BBIN started in June 2015. And Nepal point of view, Nepal doesn't have to invest anything for this BBIN projects, number one. Second, it gives the option of motor vehicle agreement is already operational and 10 routes are already active. And it gives an option of transmission lines and also gives options for the inland waterways. And if you compare with the BRI, which came just 2 years later of BBIN, and so far the negotiation is still on. The number of projects are not defined yet. It's 9 from 32 to 9 now, and railway line appears very uncertain. And the cost, cost of the projects are yet to be settled down. So my question here is basically to ask you, from your presentation, I find that you have recommending particularly Nepal emerging as a reconnecting between China and reinventing between China and India, particularly emerging as a basically entrepot or as a trade route between these countries, which happened in 6th century, 7th century BC. Now my question is, the BBIN, if you analyze between BRI and BBIN, you see BBIN is a low-hanging fruit for Nepal from Nepalese point of view. But so far, what as an Indian scholar, I found that Nepal doesn't take much interest in BBIN. But rather, almost more than 50% scholars in Nepali, they prescribe that Nepal should go for BRI, which is still appear very uncertain because of the geographical dynamics, cost effective, and the feasibility factors. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
There, to your, and then the last question, I think, over there.
My question is to you, sir, and Mr. Lama. Do you think Nepal can choose between India and China? Is it possible? I mean, if it has to. Because can you sustain really communism from China coming in, the Xi Jinping holding a workshop? Can you really, do a communism and follow communism, Chinese communism in Nepal? Can it happen? Is it possible? De facto, Point number 2, to a lady, I'm sorry, I'm putting in a very, very personal, straight question to you. What do you really the Nepalese expect from India, I mean, India is a small brother, will remain a small brother, it's a small one. I mean, de facto, I'm talking in terms of facts, right, straight. I mean, especially since your tweet, which I believe you tweeted in 2015, right? Something which went viral and created a lot of storm. And can you please answer what really you expect from India, right? In spite of having all the things which already Nepal has, right? De facto, right? Don't expect, whatever the size of a person is, he should, expect only that much, right?
Thank you. To the right, the last question we have.
Thank you very much. My name is Sagar. My question is to all of you. The Nepal is really a geopolitical, storm, you can say, and it's between two major states. So my question becomes, Xi has written somewhere that they are afraid of Tibet being, their perception that Tibet can be a sort of a problem for them, and they wanted a treaty with Nepal, and they have done it for, non-war, something like that. So the perception of Chinese that if Tibet has to be secured, then they have to have a good relation with Nepal, and that is what is keeping Chinese at the brink of, all these halagulas. The next point is that it is the Buddhist country also, as Hindu country also. So I would like to know from any of the panelists whether the South Korea and Japan, if steps into the development, that would give a more boost to the Nepalese, and it will make some sort of, balancing act between China and India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I think we have a good masala of questions, comments, and we'll go, with your permission, 9 minutes beyond time. We'll end at 5:45 max. So I'll start in reverse order, and you can pick whatever you wish in sort of 3 minutes, if possible, and then we'll close it down. I mean, we're being recorded. It'll be live. I think hopefully this event will generate also a longer discussion about India, Nepal, connectivity, Himalayas. Professor, I mentioned the invite, the Mussoorie sort of Himalayan convention, which I think you played also a bit of role in steering, and I think there are important issues which go beyond just geopolitics of it. There's a climate, there's a developmental dimension, there are border states of India which are deeply enmeshed across these states. I think at some point, Sujeev, in your book you mentioned that the distance between Kathmandu and Delhi is the same as Kathmandu and Guwahati is closer to Yangon than to Delhi. That's your concept of East-South Asia, I think, there again. So, Chandan, maybe we'll start with you, if you have any comments or answers to some of the questions.
Yeah, I think Nepal needs money to grow, and be it foreign private money or public money, Nepal needs money for medium and large infrastructure projects, especially those that we consider are the binding constraints to growth, like hydropower, roads, good highways. Rails are a too distant dream that's going on, but we have to be realistic. We need good roads for both transit of goods and then for people, movement of people. We need hydropower electricity to power up industries and houses. We need good sanitation system, drinking water, and these basic things that define urban development and these things. So public money good because it comes with a concessional blend. Private money good as a FDI. So wherever it comes from, it's good. But if I were a bureaucrat as Minister of Finance, I'd be thinking about diversifying risk. That means diversifying destinations where money is coming from, FDI. So you don't take too much at very high interest from one country. So in that sense, money from any European East Asians or North America, wherever it comes from, it's good for Nepal.
Akansha will go in reverse order, so
okay.
Up to you.
They're very difficult questions, but I will try. As far as the
Remember your tweet of 2015?
No, not at all, but it has to do with the larger expectations of the Nepalese from Indian establishment. On the delivery, I will club the two questions together because since I have only 2 minutes. I'll just take you back to the Neighbourhood First policy of 2014. What were the basics of Neighbourhood First policy? It tacitly meant non-interference in domestic politics. It meant support for economic development and also support to the democratic polity in the neighborhood. None of this back from 2014 to 15 actually worked in the case of Nepal. So there was a huge backlash, and then there emerged victorious a government which was completely against the support of Indian government to the Madhesi movements in the Tarai. So I'm sure there's been a realization in New Delhi as well that pushing too much of political agenda in a sovereign country could have its own backlash at home. So I'm sure there has been a realization. And I will just quickly take you also back to, we just recently had Raisina dialogue, and the External Affairs Minister now has categorically stated, and this is very, very significant, he said that India does not want to be seen as an obstructionist force. It wants to be seen as a fair and supportive force. And India would also like to lead discourses on very important issues like climate change and connectivity, for instance. I think there has been a shift in the way India is viewing the neighborhood as well. And you know what has happened over last 10 years, 15 years. So therefore, and especially in case of Nepal, you know, there is a discourse that India is speaking too much and doing less. So therefore, the focus on delivery will definitely bring Nepal-India relation back on track. That's one. And sir, just to quickly answer your question on expectations has been tremendous because India is Nepal's closest neighbor. And politically, there has been an expectation of non-interference for a very, very long time for India to take stock of the grievances. We have major bilateral issues. For example, the border dispute. The Kalapani Susta recently became a major issue in Nepal. It was hotly debated. We have border issues. We have a tremendous trade deficit with India. Now, obviously, there's an expectation that India would work on that. There is also a people-to-people level this thing. One thing I think the book, Sujeev definitely does not talk about is the importance that India is laying on the,
Possible. Sujeev speaks about all topics.
No.
Sujeev speaks, everything is in the book.
This is definitely missed out because Modi government is really emphasizing on the people-to-people connect and the religious connectivity. The Ramayana circuit, Buddhist circuit, and Jain circuit, you know, has a huge potential to put India-Nepal relationship back on track. And on is China replacing India in Nepal? Well, I look at it differently. I don't think so. It is about China replacing India. It is about Nepal trying to balance its bilateral relationships so that we can leverage the best out of the largest growing economies. I hope that.
On the Terai and the Madhesi issue, just we mentioned a bit before, but do you share? I mean, do you sense this there in the plains? There is a sense of disappointment with India, a sense of being ditched, a sense of being abandoned after playing it up dramatically, right? Coercive power in many ways, ditching it. And how do you see that going forward? Is it non-issue forever? Is it going to come back eventually, domestically in Nepal through Indian support or some type of sort of pushing?
For me, it's not a non-issue at all, because like I mentioned, there are inherent problems in the constitution, and this is not only about the Madhesis, it's also about the minority rights and women, you know. The citizenship issue is a huge issue in Nepal. I think this is a discourse which is there. It is subdued because of the forces that are in power. The Madhesis and the minority communities in Nepal do feel betrayed. Firstly, they did feel betrayed when the Maoists, came to power and did not take this minority issue to the forefront. The Maoists too left the minority issues back, and there is an expectation that India would, engage at least in the discourse right now and take it up with the Oli government.
Just on the initiative also you had mentioned, I mean, the sort of the move from what I used to call denial to delivery, right? You have, I think, in the sense of the Indian government, the idea that denial, obstructionism is no longer sustainable, whether it's to keep the Chinese or the Americans, the Japanese, or whoever out. The best game is going to be one of more delivery. And I think Prime Minister Modi, when he went to Kathmandu 2018, actually called India a Sherpa and said, we will carry the relationship forward. We must. The onus is on India to deliver more, better, quicker, and be more generous and sort of asymmetric in that sense, which is not new, as we know from the Gujral Doctrine in the 90s.
Just one last point, please. Sorry, because General is here. The discourse on India-Nepal relation is highly dominated in Nepal by the youth. I was there in Nepal recently. See, we would want to see the areas of convergence. What are the areas that we can converge on between China and India? I know that in Delhi, there is a sense that we cannot engage in a trilateral cooperation. But if you look at what Modi government is saying we have no option but to engage with China. And Mr. Jaishankar has repeatedly said this. So I'm sure there are areas of convergence, and I think that is what the Vajra, unleashing of Vajra, wants to point, that Nepal, China, and India have to figure areas of convergence so that Nepal can get the larger economic benefit.
And other actors, as we discussed, many, multilateral, inclusive. Professor Lama, please.
Yeah, thank you. South Asia, we have seen as a teacher, when I teach South Asia in the classroom, I find it very difficult to give any theoretical connections to what has been happening in South Asia. No theory, starting with realist to constructivist school, would really even touch what is happening in South Asia. So it's a very, very complex situation. But see, things would get unfurled. Say, for example, one of the things which would get very quickly unfurled in the case of next 1 decade or so is what is happening in Mussoorie and Ruili between Myanmar and China. You have a huge border trade going up to almost $7 billion between Myanmar and China in the Mussoorie. And one of the things which is happening is, which no one expects, is it is going to be determined by a new variety of trading matrix known as pegging with a domestic currency. It will be no longer in what you call it in US dollars, it will be in yuan. So, and that is likely to happen in case of almost all the South Asian countries. I can see that likely to happen in Pakistan also. The other thing which is very critical in today's Nepal is, when I see Nepal 30 years back and when I see Nepal today, I see a huge change as far as the discourse management is concerned. Who determines the discourse in Nepal? Sujeev rightly said 30% of Nepal's remittances, 30% of Nepal's GDP is constituted by remittances, right? That means whole lot of Nepalese, young boys, girls, entrepreneurs, industrialists, doctors, professionals are all across the globe today. Come back, bring a new kind of knowledge, discourse, technology, techniques, right? Challenge what traditionally could not be challenged. So I think this has become, this is going to be a serious major disruptions in what has been the traditional relationship between India and Nepal, or Nepal and China. Having said this, what are the options for India? Can, say for example, in case of BRI, if BRI really happens, right, if big projects happen, what are the options for India? For us, the option would be to either to keep quiet, or to react, or to proact. So far, we have opted the two options. The first option, we have not been able to proact. The only proactive project which we could do in a big way, visibly and tangibly, was the for the initiation of the major railway project. And such kind of proactions used to be the actual phenomenon in case of Nepal-India relations in 50s, 60s and 70s. You proact, right? You go all out. Today, we don't see much of activities of that nature. But what Nepal faces today in terms of India and China, I think similar cause of situation prevails in other South Asian countries, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Afghanistan, in Bhutan, in Nepal, even in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, right?
Northeastern states in India.
Yeah.
The northeastern states.
Yes. So it is. So so all these countries, if you see some of the statements given by say Prime Minister Hasina, if you see given by statement given by the presidents and the Prime Minister in Sri Lanka, they are all looking for a new model of balancing India and China, right? They do not know what to do. Right? They want to see acceptable, sustainable model of these two situations. And I think in that case, Nepal is in a very, very complex situation today, precisely because the relationship between India and Nepal are so complex, so comprehensive, and so institutionalized, right? Yes, government to government you have problems, but absolutely no problems between what happens between people to people between India and Nepal. It's such a smooth relationship, regardless of what happens between two governments, between two political parties in India and in Nepal. The relationship is so smooth. Everything functions the way it has been functioning for the last 50, 60 years. Therefore, I think what is very critical is for the government, for India and Nepal to really renegotiate some of the terms of their cooperations and exchanges. And one of the most critical areas where they have to renegotiate and reorient their terms of relationship is what will be their priorities. It is people to people contact, civil society contacts, business to business contact, or government to government contact. Because so far it is, though the three layers, civil society, business and people, are the prime movers of India and Nepal, the domination has been mostly by, or even the what you call discourse is mostly dominated by what happens between two governments. So I think they have to really prioritize in this respect. Last question I would like to say is about communism and what would happen. I think Nepalese variety of communism is nothing new as far as India is concerned, right? Because we have the same set of, there is nothing which would distinguish Nepalese communist parties and Nepalese communist practices or Nepalese communist institutions from what we have what we have in India, in Kerala, in Tripura, in Bengal. So I think that would not really matter. What would really matter is how do you prioritize in the traditional matrices and bring in. Say, for example, it's very interesting to see that we are, South Asia, we are least integrated as far as economic indicators are concerned. 5% of intra-regional global trade is intra-regional. But if you see the other side of it, we are most integrated as far as pollution is concerned. Right? But nobody really talks about this aspect. Yeah. Right? We are most integrated as far as soft parts of our relations are concerned. Yeah. Food, culture, tourism, right? Cinema, all kinds of things, right? No, you really cannot distinguish between what happens in Nepal and what happens in India on certain aspects.
So I'm actually proud to say that as part of our Samband initiative, we're trying to measure Bollywood connectivity in South Asia too, and cultural. Absolutely, there's a lot of different forms of connectivity which go beyond those hard metrics. Just Professor Lama, brilliant, I think what you said, and it reminded me that, say, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we used to say, the relationship doesn't have often the political commitment at the top, but the government prime ministers, I think no Indian prime minister had visited Nepal in 20 years till Prime Minister Modi went. No Indian Prime Minister visited Sri Lanka, I think, in almost 40 years, if you accept the 87 IPKF visit of 6 hours where Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was actually, hit by a Sri Lankan soldier. Almost, I sense from what you're saying that sometimes now we've overcompensated. Sometimes it's too much politics, too much government to government, and now we sort of compensate with the governmental, civil society, business to business, bureaucratic tracks, which sometimes are really struggling to what I would call, you mentioned those 3 modes, the proactive one, I would almost say hyperactive one. I mean, we had a very hyperactive outreach from India towards Nepal, very good, but that needs to be followed up. And hyperactivity is great, it sets the ambition, it sets the target, but it's also sometimes a liability because you're promising a lot and you start seeing the strains and difficulties, etc. Sujeev, last but not least, I think you have the last word now to sort of bring it all together, and then we'll close it up.
Okay, thanks. I think since there will be no questions, I can be a bit more bolder after this. So I think I've just tried to put it into 4 or 5 buckets in terms of the questions that came in. And post 2015, yes, after the blockade, we've seen there has been a complete alienation of a whole generation of Nepalis, and you can see that. And let's not forget, it's a country of 50% of people under 25. So if you talk to the younger generation, and at the same time, you had China come in, get interested, and the BRI came in at the same time, and then you have the soft power of China. And if you see every year 12, 15,000 young people between 30 to 40 years are being taken to China on different junkets, different trips, and they are coming back seeing Guangzhou, seeing Beijing, seeing Shanghai, and naturally, and if they are not come to India, their viewpoints are going to be different. So we should not forget that. Buddhism is, yes, as a Shakya and being part of a lot of our core commune. I've seen hundreds of my country cousins going to China, getting a lot of activities happening. Some is, some more open, some more closed. But then I think when we have to come to, be it with India, be it with China, Nepal's preparedness has been very poor. So here's it, one of the most powerful person on earth, Xi Jinping, comes to Nepal, and we decide to keep him in a hotel for a couple of hours, and he goes out. Neither he goes to any tourist spot. He's just served a meal. If you look at the menu, it's sort of a menu that you don't want to go through. There's nothing. So how do you showcase? How do you have that preparedness? I think that is very critical. And I think what they have been able to do, as you're talking about, in terms of, you go to the embassy, they speak in Nepali. It's not like going to Indian embassy where you're confronted in Hindi right at the, at the gate. And that's what the young people don't want, and that's what, the issues of sovereignty does not come through bigger issues. So these are some of the big challenges that is going to come in. And when we look at BRI related to this, you have to understand that BRI is not just a Nepal-focused policy. And for the work I've been doing in Southeast Asia, as Professor Lama was saying, we've seen how the way they have just moved in, and we've seen that in Africa. And we are only part of it, a part of this whole move that's taking place. And it is, let's not forget, it's multiple times a Marshall Plan. It's a purely business trade initiative. And if you don't know how to negotiate with them, you're going to get into trouble. So that's what, we need to really understand, that how do we build up our negotiation skills, capacity. So we need to understand. Second issue, I think beyond, when we look at India, Nepal, I think I have always been critical about how Delhi and Kathmandu looks at this relationship with each other. Yeah. The issue is at the border. Let's not forget that $3 billion is sent from Nepal to India through workers, Indian workers working in Nepal. We are number 8 destination in sending remittances to India. Let's not forget that. So we just think that it's only Delhi that is giving. And I remember when I used to be studying here, there's this concept that Nepalis form the ABCD of the Indian society. Aya, Bera, Chaprashi, Darwan. And you've moved beyond that. Suddenly you have this sense of discomfort that people have moved beyond those roles, and that is where, and Nepalis are getting exposed. You got 60,000 students going to Australia, 10,000 going to US, there are thousands going to UK. They are traveling around the world. There are 3 million people working, and they're coming back. They have moved. So I always say Nepal is no longer India locked. 30 years ago, I didn't have an option. If I had a medical issue, I had an education issue, I had to come to India. But now people have a lot of options. So we need to look from that perspective as to how, and there are more fresh voices that are going to come in. And I think in Nepal, I always complain, is the 2% of men above 65 that control the 98% discourse, 98% and the discourse. And I think we need more younger people having this discourse, more younger exchanges. And this is why, when I did the panel for my book launch in Kathmandu, all the panelists were under 35. And the discourse that came out was completely different than the usual
Today
thing,
also, today also. Today we also.
So that's the. On the military, I would like to, just my quick comment is that I think if the blockade was resolved, as far as I would see it, was because of the strong military relationship we have between the two countries, and that's going to continue. Every time there's a problem in India and there's a soldier that dies, generally it is a Nepali who dies. So that's, I think, is going to, we are not going to have Nepalis, till Nepalis are going to serve in the Chinese army or US army, this relationship, I don't think this is going to change. So we need to look at from that perspective. In terms of Nihar's, issue on BBIN, as a propagator of East-South Asia, I've been trying to push as much as possible, but every time we have a BBIN meeting, how many, Indian folks turn up? How many of the decision makers turn up? It just becomes the same set of people talking about the same things. So where is it that we are going to get, break that? And especially the business community on all sides, these people who have been rent-seeking on the border, how do you control?
But Sujeev, motor vehicle agreement, inland waterways, those are two very new issues.
Yeah, but then if you look at it from, we are the partner organization in that study, and if you look at it, all the guys have rejected it. Because those guys who are rent-seeking at the border do not want this to come, where, all the little money they are making on the side, and especially all the people who are gatekeeping out there, they are not going to get money. And we have seen how this works in Africa. We have seen in East Africa how it works. So I think it's a bigger challenge. As I would say that as a propagand of East-South Asia, I feel BBIN is something that's a low-hanging fruit. I agree. But how much of resources we are putting behind it in terms of intellectual resource, in terms of financial resource, in terms of where's the secretariat going to be? I've been, crying loud to say that let the secretariat be in Kolkata. It cannot be managed to Delhi. Let Bangladesh, let also get the Nepali provinces in, not Kathmandu in. Let get province 2 involved. Get
Darjeeling.
Involved.
Why not have it in Darjeeling?
Yeah, and have it in Darjeeling. Get Sikkim involved. So that's there. I think my final thing is that I feel whenever discussions come, and especially in South Asia, I always say, it's like people like me talking about weight loss. I always tell people, you do your stuff, you exercise, lose weight, and then come to me how to do weight loss. The tendency is that people like me going around and telling how to lose weight and how to gain hair. That has been our problem. I end here. Thank you.
You have unleashed the Vajra now.
Yeah, completely.
But the hair will come back, I'm sure. You'll go some of your 20 days meditation somewhere, and something will happen, Sujeev.
But nobody touches Tibet, China.
Professor Lama, Tibet, Buddhism, China, and how the Chinese are using Buddhism.
No, Nepal.
Nepal.
I think we should close it.
Well, sorry. You see, you will find a huge difference between what Nepal used to think about Tibetans, right, and what it thinks about Tibet and Tibetans today. If you go to Tibet, you will find a large number of Nepalese working there in hotels. They have their own hotels there. I could see Nepalese have their restaurants even in Sigatse, Ganse, even in a place like Saga, right, very far off places. And so it used to be a kind of a relationship which was best historically between what Nepal used to exchange with Tibetans, trade, pilgrimage, marriage, all kinds of things. Today they are primarily driven by what China says vis-a-vis Tibet, right? The Chinese would say that we don't want Tibetans to come to Nepal and be recognized as refugees, and Nepal would say, yes, that is not in the interest of Nepal also.
And deport them?
Right, and deport them to a large extent on the guise of that, saying that Nepal has not signed the 1951 Convention on Refugees and 1967 Protocol. Right, so it's a very distinct. So if you ask a Tibetan who is living in Nepal today, and who has been living in Nepal today for last many, many years. They will also tell you what kind of restrictions they feel, what kind of situations they have in terms of openly practicing even their cultural practice. You see there. So there is a huge change.
Thank you so much. Please. Yeah, please, Hari, yeah, please. The mics have gone home.
Thank you, Tino, and thank you for bearing. I mean, and sorry about this last-minute intervention. Sujeev, congratulations for bringing out the book. It's always good and great to share the perspective of the Nepal's perspective with the larger audience, and thank you particularly for the message of optimism, the underlying message. And the point, like the topic of constitution, I just wanted to make one point to know. Are there issues? Okay, the answer, people may have different views. But my simply request, by the way, I'm Hari and I work at the Embassy of Nepal. So my view, I mean, my request is from the perspective of inclusive provisions, or from the perspective of gender representation, or from the perspective of the incorporation of the democratic values, universally recognized democratic values. From all this perspective, give a fair reading of the Constitution. The English version is also available. Make a comparison of Nepal's constitution with any other constitution in the world, and then let's discuss on that basis. Whose constitution is better? I mean, our assessment is that the constitution that we have stands tall when compared with, the constitutions around the world.
Thank you, Hari. And I think, beyond that discussion, out to this discussion, we should have this discussion. And thank you, Hari, for reminding us. But let me remind you of something very positive. Your country was at war till 2006, right? We forget that. And it's an amazing transition towards peace, towards a constitution with its limitations. I think we all agree there are limitations. All constitutions are work in progress. Democratic, inclusive constitutions. But I think what I find fascinating, which drew me to Nepal, is how a country which had one of the deadliest civil wars, we forget, short but deadly civil war, managed to transition towards peace. I think credit goes to the political actors in Nepal, to the people of Nepal first and foremost, and also, as several leaders in Nepal have acknowledged, to India, which played a very important role, which is often forgotten in the West, in trying to facilitate that transition with its ups and downs, but has played a determinant role. Let me just finish with one quote before I go to thanks. One of my favorite quotes about this typical issue of nationalism between India and Nepal. And it's political speech about attacking each other, and India's a bully, or Nepal is going with China. B.P. Koirala, who was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Nepal in February 1959, he met Nehru privately, Prime Minister Nehru here, and it's a very interesting moment where B.P. Koirala is actually reaching out to the Chinese. He actually visits China. India gets slightly nervous, upset, not surprisingly. There was a beginning of a diplomatic relationship between Nepal and the PRC. And look what B.P. Koirala remembers in his biography, Nehru having told him. And these are Nehru's words, I quote, "If it helps you, B.P. Koirala, to create a nationalist image of yourself by taking us, India, to task, by attacking us, by saying you're bad, India," he said, "you are welcome to do that, because we do not want to destroy your image as a nationalist." I think that shows that political foresight also, and taking a relaxed view. The natural smaller countries, smaller people, smaller geographically, small in that sense, I don't mean it pejoratively, will have anxieties, including about connectivity. We see that in Bhutan. Bhutan has opted out of the MVA because it has anxieties about India, sort of somehow flooding the market with its trucks or cabs, etc. So two quick thanks and invites. Please buy Sujeev's book. We've discussed it, but please read it also. Second, please do check out our Samband initiative. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's going to go live tomorrow morning with this first concept paper. It's going to be a series of dozens of briefs on a variety of indicators of connectivity, and we need all of your support and feedback as we go along and try to make this also a regional cooperative sort of engagement with a variety of scholars, think tankers, government experts around the region. It'll go up. Samband, it's called, Samband Initiative. And finally, two thanks to our two teams do a lot of work in the background. You know, I show up here always to moderate and have a good time and discuss with my friends and colleagues, etc. Nitika Nayar and her team, and Zara Kazmi from the communications team. And a final applause for our panelists. It's a 100% Himalayan panel discussion today, except me. And I think that was very important for us to hear what you see and how you look at this region and what India can do more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tino.